Joshua Woodroffe. Please call me Josh. I am a designer and a photographer. I operate a business called pixelMIGHT. At pixelMIGHT, we help small businesses and artists with things like websites, graphics, and images. We're located in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, in the same building as Phoenix Art Supplies and Framing. This upcoming video is from a talk I did at Phoenix Art Supplies and Framing, and was really focused on how to photograph your art and use it in various situations. So please, if you have any questions about the content in the video, comment below or contact me directly. My information is in the description. And of course, please consider liking the video, pushing the subscribe button for future content, and sharing it with your friends. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the video.
All right, so we got a room full of artists here. And I understand how hard it can be to take a picture of your artwork and get it up onto Entry Thingy or even Facebook or anything else. You know, you have a nice quality picture, all of a sudden you get it up there and it just looks terrible sometimes, right? So we're going to cover things like that today. You know, everything from kind of just something to do with lighting, something to do with how to compose your image in camera before you take the picture, different things like that. Okay, so brief overview. What will we be discussing? I just touched on this a little bit, but the how and what to use to take a picture of your artwork. We'll see it doesn't have to be anything fancy. The two most common file types you can use and their properties. Where each file type may be useful. Image resolution and what's up with pixels, and I promise not to throw too much technical stuff at you. It's actually a simplified version of it, which is not too bad. How to use free online software to adjust the image size. If you have Photoshop or you have Elements or something like that, that's great. But if you don't, there are free options out there that will do the job in most cases. And then tips, just a real quick tips for entries, websites, and social media. And it's all going to have a focus on the internet. We will talk a little bit about print during the pixel part of it and the resolution part, but it's really 99% focused on use for the internet. And so our goal is for you to gain the basic understanding of the what's and how-tos of handling digital images, photos of your artwork. Let's get into it. All right, so tips for photographing your artwork. There's three things that you need to take a picture. You need a camera, a source of light, and a steady hand or tripod, preferably a tripod. And you'll see why as we go on here, why a tripod is so much better than just trying to hold a camera or even your phone. And then we're going to use those things to compose and focus, capture or create soft, even light. Capturing light might be outside, creating light might be using something like these here. So maybe not this camera, but it could take a picture. So basically all cameras can produce a good picture. It really comes down to how you use it and the settings, and the light that you use is going to make a bigger difference than the camera that you have. You can have the cheapest camera that there is, and it can take a better picture than you have if you have the best camera, but you don't have the right light. It's a fact. Of course, there's always buts. There are some cameras that are better than others. I'm just going to real quickly run through these, give you an idea of, you may have one of these cameras, or you may be interested in getting one, but just a real quick overview of different types of cameras. And if you guys have a question at any point along the way here, please do raise a hand. Do you have a question?
iPads. I take images of my work with an iPad, and it's very difficult because it's large, it's hard to hold it straight, and so is any of this going to pertain to iPads?
I'm not going to specifically address iPads, but I will, but basically the same things that fall on cell phones fall onto iPads. The difference between an iPad, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know all the technical specs, but the biggest difference between an iPad and an iPhone, the newer iPhone, is the amount of megapixels in the camera, but that doesn't mean that you can't take a good picture with it. All right, so good, better, and best. Good is your camera, your phone. you know, your iPad. It's about the most expensive camera you can ever buy considering what you're getting out of it. But it will take good pictures. And the new cameras, the new Samsungs, the new iPods, and I'm sure others too, they're really great cameras. They're better cameras than the digital cameras of 10 years ago, sometimes 5 years ago. They really are. You can take great pictures with it, nothing to go wrong with it. You just have to know how to use it right in order to do it. And more importantly, have the right lighting. Better is a point and shoot. The reason this is often better is because they typically have better sensors in them. This is not always correct, you know. There's cheap point and shoots out there that are not as good as iPhones, you know, but a lot of point and shoots are better. But a little bit better yet is a point and shoot that has manual controls on it. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later about how to set your camera up, but that can be a huge thing, being able to put your camera in manual mode and you control the camera and not let the camera make decisions for you. And then of course there's DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. They can range in price from $500 to many, many thousands. But it's, once again, it comes down to the reason that they're a little bit better quality, going to give you a little better image, is because they have better sensors in them. But that doesn't mean that you can't accomplish it with your iPhone. It just means that these will do a little bit better for you, give you a little bit more flexibility. But, you know, unless you're going to use it for other purposes, don't go spend $500 on the camera just to take pictures of your artwork. You don't need to. You know, if you're going to be using them online, let me verify that. If you're doing prints, that's a different story, but we're talking about online. All right, so first thing up is natural light, you know, the stuff that the sun makes. Natural light is great. It's out almost every day, but as long as it's soft and even. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with taking pictures of your artwork outside. And, you know, you have to be in the shade or in indirect sun or on a cloudy day. Otherwise, the colors don't come out right. It looks washed out. Just doesn't work. So avoid direct sunlight. One mistake I see, the second item here is one mistake I see a lot of artists make, which is actually putting it under a tree in the shade, but there's dappled light on it. You know, that's almost worse than direct sunlight because then you have all these different splotchiness as opposed to something that's even at all. And then what we seek is indirect sunlight, shade, diffused sunlight through a material. Basically, you know, the soft boxes I have up here, this is obviously artificial light, but it is diffused. It's through a piece of muslin or something like that. And there's other things that you can use that we'll get into. So cloudy days are our friend. And another but. But there's more options. Okay, so remember, we seek shade and diffused sunlight that is soft and even. There's a lot of places to do this. You can find it around you know, your house. You can find it in your yard. Doreen, I immediately thought of your room, when, the room with the skylight. It works great in there. A piece of white foam core works really good, or another whiteboard. Choose white. Don't go with like red because you might be tinting your board. But if you can't find shade, get a big piece of foam core, have someone hold it over it, and then take the picture.
Hold it over what?
The art.
Oh, the art.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't matter if your camera's in the sun.
No, it's not that you're putting the art against the foam core.
No, you don't have to. And you'll see it in a few moments here that my outdoor photos, I didn't use foam core, but I do in the indoor because I just prefer to, you know. But yeah, it's the idea is that you hold it over it and it's white, so it's going to reflect some of the light onto the artwork, so it just makes it a little bit easier to take a picture of a nice even, it just lights it nice and evenly, but it blocks the sun. So a little harder to do if you get bigger and bigger pieces, but works great on smaller pieces. A room with a large window and a sheer curtain. It's basically diffused light. Just be careful with that one. You know, you want to make sure it's even. You don't want it to be brighter on one side than the other side, of course. Shady porch works. Different times of day, sometimes midday a little bit can still be a little bit hard with that. The shade of a building. And then a white sheet will also work. You can tack a white sheet between two trees. You can, you know, throw it over a clothesline. There's a million things you can do, but as long as you can create a diffused light through a white sheet, you have a beautiful, nice, even light on something. When using natural light, don't mix in artificial light. I think I meant with there. So what I mean by that is, say you're shooting in the house and you do have a nice window or something that you're shooting in front of. Don't use a lamp next to it. You know, turn that lamp off, because it's a different type of light and it'll throw a weird cast on the artwork. You almost get sometimes like, you know, you have your natural light and then over here you'll have your yellow light kind of coming across the artwork. So try not to mix the types of light. Okay, so this is what I did with, you'll see this picture throughout it. I like to smear paint on board sometimes. And so I used this piece that I did a couple years ago to just as an example. So this was outside. This is actually down in the park behind us here just the other day. It was a nice and cloudy day. I was trying to get some pictures of some dappled light, but the weather wouldn't cooperate. It cooperated for good picture taking of artwork. So really, you'll see it's a 30 by 30 piece on a tripod, or I'm sorry, on an easel. And the you know, the artwork's just pointed, the camera's just pointed directly at it. There's not any trees or anything, but you will notice, if you can see here, there is a little bit more shade behind this barn down there, even though it's a very overcast day. But you can see here where outside of the barn it is a little bit lighter, so you have to be aware of that. Look still, even on a cloudy day, look for a little bit more shade. And then it started raining 5 minutes later. So. That is one thing I'm going to get into when I talk about setups a little bit, but the short answer is there. Right, you can't, it's hard to put the artwork straight up and down and have the camera straight up and down, so you tilt them both. Anyway, so we're going to get into creating light. Now here we have some inexpensive ways to actually create light, moderately inexpensive. You can use these inside, turn the lights off, turn these on. You know, you can get these kits, one bulb kits for $100. You absolutely need a tripod for that, and we will get into that and the reasons why. This $250 kit, this is on bnh.com. This $250 kit is this setup right here. You can see it's one light versus 7 lights, so you can imagine the light difference that they put out. So those are basically 2 ways that you can create light indoors. The other way is you can get creative and build something. You can do pretty inexpensively. You've all seen these lights here. They're available at any hardware store pretty much. You get a hardware store CFL bulb. I should mention here, try to get something. There's a lot of debate about what the right color light is, but if you ever heard of a Kelvin, you want something that's between 3200 and 5500 Kelvin. These are 5500 Kelvin here. Okay. These lights. I'm sorry? The FL is fluorescent light. It's condensed fluorescent light or compact, yes, compact fluorescent light. So you need a bulb, a spot lamp. Now, then you take a wood frame, can be anything, stretcher bars, whatever. Stretch a white sheet over it, staple it together, you have a diffuser. Shoot that through it. And you have a cheap version of these, you know. It's not perfect, but it'll do the job. The one thing that's true with photography is that you don't need to spend a lot of money to get good results of photographing your artwork or any photography in general. It just makes it easier, that's all. You have more options when you spend money, but there's nothing wrong with keeping it simple. So this next set, so we get into these lights here set up in the studio. This is my studio upstairs. So this is photographed in the studio upstairs, same painting. It's just indoor with these lights on it. Now, what you'll see here is I was having trouble photographing this in the studio. It's a 30 by 30 piece. I don't have a huge studio. That's almost 1/3 the width of my studio. So I was having a lot of trouble not getting just getting a nice even light across it. So what it is, I started thinking about the way the light's lighting on it. All right, and in this case, like 90% of the time, I will have those 2 lights kind of pointing like they are now, and just kind of brought in to face the artwork a little bit or feathered out a little bit. But in this case, because of the way the lighting just wasn't working, I bounced it off the walls and the ceilings. It created a more even light because it wasn't direct. And then I noticed, oh, well, now the bottom of my artwork is a little bit darker than the top of my artwork. So I grabbed a piece of white foam core and used it as a reflector and just held it under there. And then it just bounced some light up onto there, and it created a nice even light across the painting. Okay, yeah, there's a piece of white foam core just in front of it leaning against the tripod there.
Oh, okay, I see it there.
I honestly, like, that's just sitting there because, you know, I only have two hands and not two people, but I was able to hold it with one hand and click the shutter button on a timer, of course, but we'll get into that. The back wall is the back wall of my studio is painted black, and then there's a piece of photography paper behind that, and then there's black foam core behind the painting. When I'm shooting in the studio, I do like to use the black foam core, mostly because it makes it easier to distinguish the painting from the surrounding objects, unless it's a black painting, then. Okay, so this is the two pictures that I took compared to each other. Now, the fact is, it's hard to like really say that this is true, because I brought these into Photoshop and I made some adjustments and levels and colors and everything. So is it a really one-to-one comparison out of the camera? And no, it's not, because every situation, when you go outside on different days, if it's overcast, you go outside on overcast on one day, it's going to be a different kind of overcast on another day. So you're going to have to adjust it differently. In studio, you kind of get used to things, and if you have your lighting set up, you start learning things of like, oh, I know the setup in my room here, that what I have to do is make it warmer, I have to maybe turn up the exposure a little bit. You know, you get used to a certain steps. If you take it outdoor, every day is going to be different, you know? So, and you can even see, like, it really did. I think the indoor one captured a lot of the green at the bottom a lot better than it did in the outdoor one. Well, I was hoping no one was going to ask that. I have to remember to answer to ask the questions for the camera too. So the question was, which one is closer to the real? The indoor one really is, just because I would say because of the continuous color in the green, it's a little bit more smooth, and also this yellow kind of blotch at the top right there. It looks very pink in the other one, in the outdoor photo. I honestly don't know why, you know, I couldn't get that one to be orange, but that's kind of the way it is. And this is a really hard picture too, because, you know, if you paint abstract or if you paint like smear paint like I do, all that color change makes it a lot harder to adjust than a picture that is more subtle, if you will, or something that is less just total overall color change in it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so getting through the equipment here, is up next is tripods. Okay, so you have a choice. You know, when you're holding your camera, you're going to use a tripod, or you're going to use a steady hand. The absolute best choice is tripod. You're going to learn why in a moment. I would never try to shoot a piece of artwork with a tripod, and use a tripod even with yourself. So why a tripod? When you're holding a camera in, we're going to just assume everything's in automatic mode right now. When you're holding a camera or a cell phone, and when I do say camera, I mean cell phones also, in low light conditions, it's going to make the choice to automatically increase the shutter speed. Decrease the shutter speed. So therefore keeping the shutter open longer. The best photographers can probably hand hold a camera to about 1/30th of a second. That's almost nothing, you know. The newer cameras are getting better with stabilization, but still, you know, it's like 1/30th of a second. The best photographers, us normal people, maybe 1/60th of a second. You can't even adjust yourself there. We're all just not as stable as we, you know, look like we are. So longer shutter speeds mean the camera will pick up your movement, as I just said. So you'll get a little bit of blur. I think I'm jumping ahead of myself here. So your movement means blurry images. So that little bit of movement that happens during that 1/60th of a second will make your image blurry. It will. You know, I'm sure you've seen if you ever tried to picture with a cell phone. It's so hard sometimes if you're not like into perfect lighting with your cell phone for that very reason. And another benefit of using a tripod is it helps you square up your image. When you take your picture, it won't be all skew, and we'll get into that, how to straighten an image, but it'll be a lot easier. You know, you won't have to distort buildings or anything else in that matter. You'll have a nice square picture to start with. Another tripod point. A tripod also gives you full control over your camera settings in manual mode, and we're going to get into that. Even most cell phones nowadays can shoot in manual mode. And that's going to really open up the control of your camera for you, and it's going to make it so you're going to get such better results if you do that. Tripod and manual mode, good light, this is where it's at. You will not regret it. Get yourself a tripod. Cheap, you know, you can get, these are shaky tripods, but it doesn't matter. You know, you can, once again, B&H. I use them because they're in New York City, but they're cheap. $20 for a tripod. You can get them at Staples for that same price. The Gorilla Pod with this little setup here is $20 too. I would say, you know, check out Rutherford's, check out New Hope Photo. They do have tripods there. I don't know what range of tripods they have. I know they have really nice stuff there. If you were looking for a really nice tripod, definitely check them out. But give them a chance too. But you know, if you
How do you attach an iPhone to one of these?
Oh, to the tripod.
To the regular, to the tripod, the regular tripod.
So what this is you have your regular. So this is the same as a regular tripod. It's the same screw head, and all this is a little springy thing. So you just screw that right on there, and I could take that camera off and screw it right on there if I wanted to also.
What's it called?
Well, this is called a Gorilla Pod, and I don't know what you would call this.
Do they come together when you're buying it, or you're buying two pieces?
I think they do sell them together. They have kits at Staples, yeah. So that's kind of tripods, you know, get yourself one, it's worth it. And you'll, once you know how to shoot manual, it's going to make all the difference in the world. All right, so just a quick note, take your time and set it up. When you are, so you have your easel. I assume you all have an easel, right? I heard there's a sculptor here, so maybe not as for the sculptor. But you don't need what you need. A tabletop is what you need. Put it on your easel. Put your camera on your tripod. Square it up. Take your time. Look through your viewfinder and make sure it's all nice and even and squared up. That's going to really help. Now there is a time where you're going to break the rules and not square it up, okay? And that might be if you're photographing a really high glossed varnished photo painting, or if you're glossy varnishes, reflective surfaces, gold leaf. If the light is bouncing straight back into your camera, you'll get a lot of reflection off of that. So what you do a lot of times if you have something really reflective is either try adjusting your light so it's not that direct hit back into your camera, or you take the camera and you skew it just slightly to avoid that bounce back. And I've seen it with gold leaf before where you know, it looks like just this channel of bright gold running through it if you're getting the light directly back into the camera. But then you just take the camera and move it just a little bit, and all of a sudden all that texture will show up. So
Camera back or tilted?
I would say it's not necessarily front or back, like don't move the tripod. Maybe take the camera and angle it up a little bit, or maybe take it and just aim it this way a little bit. Start there, and then if you have to get a little bit more drastic and move the tripod over 6 inches, then do that. But just start with tiny little camera movements from the tripod itself. And you'll see it, like all of a sudden.
When you do that, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
With the I photograph with my iPhone, so as soon as I start to do that, it skews the image of the
Right.
original painting
It will.
It's doing like this or.
Yeah, that's a little bit more challenging with an iPhone because you can't control the distance, like, you know, the focal length basically very well, at least. You don't know where you are. At the shorter focal lengths, you'll see that is more drastic than if you were to pinch and zoom in a little bit. You'll get less distortion when you angle a little bit.
Couldn't you fix that in Photoshop, like skew?
You can to a degree, yes, absolutely. That's one thing we're going to go over. I'm going to show you how to do this in this one program, is fix something that's out of whack.
Just by cropping it or?
No, actually pulling a corner and straightening it out. Oh yeah, and if you can, photograph your artwork before varnishing it. You know, you're going to get better results that way. A lot of times when you have a black, like something that's very dark, a very dark photograph that's really glossy, you take a photograph of it and you're going to get pins of light coming off of it. It's just going to look like, if it's on a canvas, it's just going to be, you know, a million little white dots in the dark areas. Really tough to fix in post-processing. I mean, you have to be really good at Photoshop with it. Honestly, I'm not that good at it in order to do that. You have to be very good. But if you were to take the same picture of that artwork before varnishing it, it would be fine. It's just that high gloss varnish over black just makes it almost impossible to take a picture of. Okay, so I'm going to just, this is a little bit technical stuff, but I'm going to get into this just a little bit here. So if you can shoot in your camera in manual mode, absolutely do it. I have a Samsung Galaxy S, this is an S5, and I can shoot in full manual mode and control most options in the camera.
Well, I don't understand how you get on an iPhone or Samsung, how you get to how do you do manual?
It's in the settings. I don't know every camera. I know my cameras and my cell phone, but in a cell phone, usually when you're in the picture app, you're about to take a picture, there's a settings button. In this particular Samsung Galaxy S5, I just swipe to that'd be left to right, and it would automatically show up there. Not all cell phones can do it, but most modern ones do, and this one is now, what, 2 or 3 generations old. But you know, it's only a month old, but 2 or 3, no, a couple of years. Yeah. I would recommend, if you're not sure how to do it or if it can be done, to just Google the model number of your phone, and then manual camera mode. So in manual mode, I'm not going to explain what every one of these means in detail, but your aperture. If you're on a point and shoot that shoots in manual, you can almost definitely do this. My cell phone cannot control aperture from the settings, but it does everything else. But the aperture, set at f8. The reason is it's a lot of depth. You know, especially if you have a lot of texture to your painting, it'll make sure it captures it all. Okay. I should note these settings. You're going to want these to put these settings. You're going to want it on a tripod. ISO 100. Some cameras can control that, some cannot. But that will make sure that your picture is as crisp as possible. As you go up in ISO number, especially with cell phones, if you get up to ISO, probably with most cell phones around 400, definitely 800, you're going to get grainy pictures. And that's what's happening when you hand hold your camera to take a picture and it's in the full auto mode, and you're, is that it's dark and the camera is going, I need more light, and it is shooting up the ISO, and that's why the pictures come, you might get a grainy photo if you're not on a tripod and you're not controlling it. Just as kind of a side note there, the reason that we're able to put it in this in manual mode and shoot is because of the tripod. In a dark situation, you could not possibly hand hold and shoot at ISO 100 and have a decent shutter speed. Okay, Now your shutter speed is going to be completely dependent on, and I don't have that noted on here, but the shutter speed is the variable. So we're at f8, we're at ISO 100, the shutter speed is the variable. When you change your shutter speed on your camera, depending on the camera, most point and shoots will show you the actual real effect in live. A DSLR, you kind of have to either know what you're doing or trial and error. The shutter speed you'll see as you adjust it on your camera, if you have it in f8 and ISO 1000 on a triangle, you'll see your picture lighten and darker, and you can control it and choose how exposed it is that way. And you're guaranteed to get a sharp image that is not grainy and is the correct exposure if you set those numbers and then change your shutter speed. Okay, I know that's kind of confusing if you don't know, have anything to relate it to as far as never shot a manual before. Yeah, absolutely. On this camera here, when I photograph with it, it's in f8, ISO 100. I put it on my tripod, and then I just change the shutter speed to get it to where I want it to be. Which is basically to say proper exposure. What's proper exposure? You know what I mean? That's kind of a subjective term, but you want it to look like it's going to, like you want it to look like on your computer screen. Aim for the same thing.
Wait, one question there. So if you're adjusting the shutter speed per the f-stop and the ISO, don't you need that shutter speed to be 1/60th or 1?
Not if you're on a tripod. But if you look at the, I don't know if you can see it from there, but the picture of the back of my camera here, where I took that there, it is at 1/6 of a second.
Okay. And your hand pressing?
I am, but with this I'm hand pressing with a timer.
Oh, okay.
And I'm very careful too.
Gotcha.
So with a cell phone, you typically don't have a choice of like, you know, you can usually have a timer. I did test it, and I found on mine there is a timer, and I can set it up and do a timer on mine. Some may not. And you have to be real careful because you obviously don't want to, like, you know, poke the camera forward 3 inches, but you know, or you know, even a millimeter. You just have to very carefully attach it. Because yes, you're right, is that even on the tripod, if you push the button too hard or something like that, you can get out of focus. But we're at f8 here, so your depth of field is pretty deep, you know? So the chances are that you're going to completely knock it out is pretty thin, yeah. You don't have a choice with this with some cameras, but if you can, try to get to 50 millimeters. I wouldn't even know how to do that on my cell phone, okay? But on my cameras, you know, you can choose either some interchangeable lenses. If you have that option, you can put a 50 millimeter equivalent lens on there. Or if you have a point and shoot, most point and shoots, if they have a zoom on it, it'll tell you where you are. Whether it's true 50 millimeters or not on that particular camera, there's a million things. There's a whole different conversation. But 50 millimeters, if you can hit it, is ideal because that's basically the equivalent to our eyesight, and you'll get the least amount of distortion inward or outward on a if you have that camera lens on it. If you are looking through your cell phone and you do see, you know, it's all squared up, but you're getting this kind of bowing in the side or bowing out the side, pinch in or pinch out a little bit. Okay, so we covered adjust your shutter speed for proper exposure. Timer or shutter release. Most cameras have a timer on it. Set it for 2 seconds, set it for 5 seconds. Carefully depress your shutter. It'll go beep, 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 take the picture. That way you're not mashing down the button and jerking the camera a little bit, throwing it out of focus. If you can use a shutter release, great. If you have a point and shoot or a DSLR, most of them either have a wired or some kind of wireless remote control you can find for it. And then you set it up and you don't have to touch it again. If you have the ability, most cell phones do have this ability, and every camera I've worked with has this ability. Turn on the grid. You can actually get a grid of lines of grid on the camera, and that'll help you when you're adjusting your camera, getting it all squared up. It'll give you guidelines to say, oh yeah, I'm pretty square on this now. Makes it a lot easier.
And where do you find that?
It'll be somewhere in the settings, depends on the model of the camera. You know, that's, unfortunately, this doesn't cover, you know, there's so many different options, and you know. But yeah, it's usually there. Another kind of trick is, you'll see on this picture here, get as close as you can for a couple reasons. Get as close as you can to the artwork with still having the whole artwork in there. Just leave a little bit at the top and the bottom. The sides, sometimes depending if it's real wide, you might be leaving a little bit at the sides and a lot at the top and the bottom. But that also, just the size of the camera view will give you kind of just a guide to say, hey, I'm on or I'm off, you know. Plus, then you're using the full potential of the camera then too. You're getting all the megapixels out of the camera that you have. Okay, so now we're going to get into two file types. JPEGs and TIFFs. Probably you've all heard of those two types. There's other types of files out there too. But really, when you're talking about what you're going to use online, or we're going to just touch a little bit here on what you might be able to do with print with a TIFF, and why a TIFF, even if you're never going to print a picture, why a TIFF might be good for you to save your images as also. All right, so first of all, how do you tell which kind of file type you have? You know, you have all these pictures on your computer. What is it, a JPEG, TIFF? Typically on most computers, this is all, you know, I use Windows. I'm on a PC. I know Macs are not much different, maybe a little bit different. But usually there's underneath of it, there's the name of the file, and it might say .jpg or .tiff. You know, that's it. You can also hover on Windows. You can hover over the image thumbnail on your desktop, and this little box right here will pop up. And that tells you all kinds of information about the file. It'll tell you the size, the megabytes, everything. Just kind of hover it there and leave your mouse there for a second, and it'll pop up. On Macs, if you open up, do you right-click on Macs now? Yeah, preview, and it'll tell you all that information too, right? So now that you know how to tell what file you have, the most common online format is the JPEG. We're going to get into reasons. It's almost always is what you're going to see on websites, third-party selling sites, Fine Art in America, for example, or FASO, social media sites, email, and online art entries. You know, entry thingy, I believe, always asks for a JPEG. JPEGs are also, you'll see them as JPEGs. I couldn't recall right now what JPG stands for. Why they threw an E in there, I don't know, but they're the same thing. So these are the advantages of JPEGs, and typically why you would use them in certain spots. JPEGs are compressed, okay, resulting in a smaller file size than a TIFF. That's why they're used in places like the internet. That's why a lot of online entry places want them. It's because you're not sending them a gigantic file that's going to clog up their systems. Almost every computer, including smartphones, can open them. They're universal. They're the most common file size that there is. But there's an important thing to know about JPEGs, and this is why we're going to talk about TIFFs in a moment. JPEGs are what's called lossy. Lossy, L-O-S-S-Y. It's kind of a weird term, but it's lossy. And it sounds exactly what it is that they lose information over time. So what happens is every time you open up a JPEG, make a little adjustment to it, and save it, it loses bits of data in it. So over time, you're actually degrading the quality of your image if you're constantly doing that. You know, so there's workarounds to that. So, you know, if you do it a couple times, no big deal. You're never going to tell the difference. A couple dozen times, if you really get in there and pixel peek and look real closely and look at it, like compare one to one, then you might start seeing it. If you're opening it up, and then saving it again. So open it up, edit it, save it, then so any action that involves saving, basically. But if you do save this like hundreds of times, you'll actually start seeing pixels disappear and turning black. Wow. And maybe 300, 400, or 500 times is what I'm talking.
But that's only if you do something with it.
That's, well, I mean, if you just open it up and save it, I believe it'll be the same thing as if you open it up, change the color. Well, if you just look at, say if you open it up in Windows Photo Viewer, some kind of just viewing program, then it's not going to affect it at all. If you open it up in the program we're going to look at in a moment here, or Photoshop, or the default editor on an iMac, and then save it again, then it will degrade. If you email it to somebody, they email it to somebody, they email it to them, you do that 500 times, it will degrade, because every time they're actually making a copy of that image. Yeah, so if you open it up and don't do any actions that involve saving it, it won't hurt at all. If you have a JPEG and you open it up, adjust it, crop it, change colors, whatever, and then save it, yes, it will. It could definitely degrade the image. But at that point, you're fixing something, right? So you just have to do what you got to do. But let's say that your original copy is still good, but you have to change the size of your image for some reason. What I would do is take the original image, open it up, change the size of it, and then save it as a different file name. And then you're not affecting the original image. So TIFFs. Now TIFFs are great for printing. They're ideal for storing on your computer. And I'll explain that in a moment. They're not for display on the internet. So TIFFs has more information in them than JPEGs do, which can result in better quality for printing. If you were to take the same image, if you were to take a TIFF and save it as a JPEG, the JPEG file would actually end up being less megabytes, if you will, than the TIFF was, because it's when you save a TIFF as a JPEG, it's actually taking information out of it, little bits of data that might have to do with color or a sharp line or something like that. A lot of times, if you're shooting in JPEGs, it doesn't really matter. That's what you're starting with. So TIFFs have really good color depth, sharper details, and they're lossless. So that means you can open up a TIFF, manipulate it, do it a million times, it will never change the quality of the image, it will never degrade it. They do take a little bit more file size, but honestly, I mean, I have thousands of images, of large images on my computer, and it's not even close to being full. There are some things here, and to work with TIFFs, the free program we're going to look at here can save something as a TIFF, but it can't open up a TIFF. So if we get into this, if you do get into this, you do need something like Photoshop or Lightroom or Elements or something like that, because then they can handle TIFFs. And you're probably, if you're really saving stuff as TIFFs, you're probably starting with a camera that can use another file format called a RAW file, which we're not going to talk about at all. But it's kind of a more advanced way of saving them, I would consider I save all my images as TIFFs, and I would consider saving, if I was shooting in JPEG, to open them up and save them as TIFFs after I manipulated them, just so that I have that image that is, doesn't need to be hurt. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It would be in the settings that you would shift from a JPEG to a TIFF?
Usually when you go, depending on the program, when you go into Save As, it's in there, your drop-down menu. Okay. So why wouldn't you use a TIFF online then? I mean, this talk is mostly about the internet and online. Well, part of the reason is a larger file size, it's more megabytes. And it would really slow down load times. But really, it doesn't matter. Internet browsers can't display them. Why? I don't know if that's because of the large size. They just chose not to. But you can't use TIFFs on the internet, so nothing else matters. But they're great for saving.
You can bring them up on your computer.
Yeah, your computer will open it. The default programs on your computer will typically open it. I can't say everyone will, because there's a million out there. But yeah, I've never seen one that can't. An interesting point about that, though, is if you open up a TIFF in, like, say, Windows Explorer or Windows Media Player, I guess it's called, it'll look a little darker than if you open up a JPEG of the same image. And that's because of the more data being compressed in that viewer. So some sites, I have seen some sites before that do want a TIFF, so that's maybe where saving as a TIFF might help. If you ever get in a bind where you go, I got JPEG, but this site wants a TIFF, or this upload, the third-party upselling sites, kind of things like Fine Art America and stuff, maybe they want a TIFF. You can still open it up in this program we're going to look at and save it as a TIFF and upload it to there. I'm trying to hurry up. I don't know. I'm just saying them as sites like them might. I have seen, if you go to like hire and print on demand sites, a lot of times they do accept a TIFF. So it might be worth it then, you know, if you have a good quality, better quality TIFF than you do a better quality JPEG. That's an option. So that's one place you might find a use for a TIFF. But a JPEG open and saved as a TIFF does not gain quality. Save your TIFF as a JPEG, you lose quality. Save your JPEG as a TIFF, you do not gain quality. Okay, we have about half an hour scheduled. I'll go a little longer if that's fine with everybody, but so I'm trying to move along here. All right, kilowatts. Actually, kilobytes and megabytes. But, you know, what are they? All right, so the little formula here is 1024 kilobytes equals 1 megabyte. Now you know. Now forget it. Instead, use a nice online calculator. Just Google kilobytes to megabytes, and right away a calculator will come up where you put in the kilobytes and it'll translate to megabytes or vice versa. Save yourself the math, you know, save yourself the frustration of trying to remember that. It's not a hard formula, but it's not worth trying to even think about. The reason I'm covering this right now is because when we get into looking at programs, a lot of times when you go to save something as something and you're trying to get to 3 meg to meet entry thingies requirements, you can't get there, and you're looking at your editing software and it's saying kilobytes and you're trying to get to megabytes. That's why I'm covering this here. Now, as a note, kilobytes and megabytes do not necessarily have any relationship to the visual image quality, because it has everything to do with the amount of data in a image. So rather they measure the amount of data stored in the file. On the internet, the data size of a file impacts the load time, just as a side note there. So that's why you don't want to go with huge megabyte pictures on the internet. Also, the larger the file size, the easier it is for someone to steal and reproduce off the internet. Now, I say that it's not easier for them to steal the image, it's easier for them to reproduce from it. It's a bigger print ability is what's in that image, of the more kilobytes it is. I'm going to touch on that real quick. So moving on. Now, so these are some examples of file sizes. These next 3 images that I'm going to show you are all exactly 1920 by 1920 pixels, exactly that, okay? They're all the same pixel dimension. But the difference between these pictures is the amount of data in them. And that is due to this this painting here, this blue and green. There's constant color change in it. There's a million different shades of blue. There's a million different shades of green. Maybe not that many, but a lot. So that all added up to 4.58 megabytes. The same picture next to it, still a pretty good amount of color in it, but not nearly as much as all that texture and everything. It came to 2.326. Same actual pixel dimensions, but the file size, the storage size is different. And to show you how much this actually makes a difference, that red square is 0.04 yada yada yada. So one solid color is not even close to a megabyte. All right, so your resolution is to commit yourself to produce better images of your artwork. I'm sorry, wrong kind of resolution. I'm just cheesy, I know. Right. So what makes an image high or low resolution? So just kind of start from the beginning. Digital images are made up of squares of colored light. That's a pixel. We call those pixels. The more pixels in the image, the higher resolution. Now, as a note, it's often a misconception that this has something to do with 72 dpi, 300 dpi, and all that. Nothing. It has nothing to do with that. This strictly has to do with my picture is 1900 pixels wide, or 2000 pixels wide, or 5000 pixels wide, versus by 300 pixels wide. It's the amount of pixels total. That's all that resolution has to do with. So the more pixels in an image, the higher resolution. A 5000 by 5000 image has higher resolution than a 2000 by 2000, especially more than a 200 by 200. And you'll understand why that's higher resolution. Resolution equates to more potential clarity. I say potential clarity because if you have a blurry image, it can have just as many pictures, but it's not going to be clear. So all those things take into factor. Like sharp image, if you're comparing one-to-one sharp images, the more pixels, the more resolution you have, the more detail you'll see on the screen and in print. Okay, PPI and DPI, completely interchangeable nowadays. Technically, pixels is technically for the computer. It's pixels per inch. DPI is dots per inch. It's for printing. But there's not really any reason to use them differently. Different programs have different things, and I think almost all of them are pixels per inch now. So for screens, pixels per inch does not matter, okay? There's been a big misconception for years upon years, and it's starting to get cleared up a little bit more, that 72 pixels per inch was what you wanted to save it for your screen. Now, in all honesty, just out of habit, I still do that. But if you have a image that is 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels at 72 DPI, and an image that is 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels at 300 DPI, they're going to be exactly the same size on your computer, because the computer doesn't care about how many pixels per inch you have. It only cares about what screen you're on and how many pixels it can fit across that screen. So if you have a 2,000 by 2,000 screen, not a real thing, but if you have a 2,000 by 2,000 screen and a 1,000 by 1,000 image, it's going to size itself to be, half that. Probably not the right math, but you get my point. Doesn't matter if it's 72 or 300 for that, which is always kind of crazy, because you see these entry sites like that require 72, and it's just irrelevant. It's totally irrelevant. Now for printing, that's not true. For printing, the minimum you want to print as 150 DPI or BPI. 300 is ideal. There are printers out there that can do 600, but they're really high-end printers. And the reason that matters is because you actually have a tangible physical size. So it's not dependent on a screen that is going to be different from one computer to the next computer, one phone to the next phone. It's completely depending on the physical size. So if you want to print a 16 by 20, the more pixels per inch you have, the more clarity you have, because there will be more pixels per inch. The more pixels you have in any size is going to give you more detail. You can actually turn an image that's 72 DPI into 300 DPI. It's not changing the resolution. It's changing. See, this is the hard thing, to disconnect the idea of a screen from a print, because they are completely different animals. And in all honesty, like we tend to approach them because they all start on the digital computer. We tend to approach them in the same vein, but they probably shouldn't even be in the same conversation in a lot of cases. Okay, so you can reduce the pixel dimensions of a 72 DPI image and increase the DPI to increase the size and increase clarity. Okay, I'll explain that. We're talking, what you're doing there is assuming that you're taking a 72-inch image, a 72 DPI image, and you want to print with it. So you want you want that 300 pixels. So you might, out of your camera, get a 72 DPI image that, let's see, so we have 72 DPIs, and I'm not going to use real numbers here. It's just going to be examples. That is let's say it's 72 DPI, and it's 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels. Now, if I look in Photoshop, this isn't going to cover the program we're going to cover here right now. It's kind of going outside that. But if I look in Photoshop, that might tell me it's it can print it like 4x4, let's say. Now, if I take that image and I change it, just change the number 72 to 300, it's still 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels wide, all right? But in the physical world, when we're talking about inches, not pixels on a screen, that will print out, there will be then 300 pixels within an inch instead of 72, okay? So what's that going to do? It's going to make the overall possibility of that image smaller. So you might only be able to print that at 2 by 2, let's say. So your image is going to get smaller printability at that point, but within each one of those squares, there's going to be more detail. Is each one of those inches. You know, I can't answer for every show, but if like say a nice, real nice glossy magazine wanted one of your images, you know, real good quality print, they're going to want it at 300 DPI. And right. Well, so here's the thing. It's all going to come back to your pixel dimensions. If you take a camera and it takes a picture with 2000 by 2000 pixels, you can get a much better quality print with a camera that is going to take it at 4000 by 4000. Whether it comes out of the camera at 72 or 300. Because a lot of times you'll see if you open up an image that is 72 DPI, but let's go 72 DPI, but it's 2000 by 2000 pixels. It's going to, if you look at what you can print it to, if you go, you know, in Photoshop, go Control Print, and you don't select the paper size, or you don't select fit to paper, it will like try to print it big and blurry. All right, it may not be too blurry depending on the image, you know. But if you change that to 300 DPI and shrink it down to the correct size for that piece of paper, it will take those pixels and compact them closer together. And then you're getting more transition. Right. I'm going to give you an example here that's kind of, for print, that is shocking, and this is the opposite. When you create a billboard, you might be creating it at 5 DPI. So you have 5 pixels per inch. All right. So thinking about that, the closer you are to something, the higher resolution you really need it to be to pick out all the detail. So you want something, you know, you're holding here or is hanging on your wall, you want that to be at 300 ideally. That's ideal. 150, 300, 600, you know, you can't, good prints can be done at 72. They're just not as good. But then when you're, you know, driving down the highway and something's I don't know what they are, 50 yards away from you, we're talking 5 pixels. So your mind still translates that 5 pixels per inch into a nice sharp image because you're that far away from it. So it's not always, you know, it has, the quality of print has, you know, if you ever look at a blurry photograph up close and then you back away from it and it's sharper, it's the same concept, you know. Okay, so no one ran out the door yet? All right. Okay, what software should you use? Well, I mean, there's a lot of great ones. Photoshop is great. We've talked about a few others, Elements, Lightroom. I don't know, you could keep going and naming them. They're great things, but for this simple kind of internet kind of talk that we're doing here, you don't need those advanced programs. You can use free online software and get all the information you need right from right on pixlr.com. So basically what pixlr.com is, it's pixlr.com for those who can't see it, it's a free web app. You don't install it on your computer, it runs in your browser, and you just upload images to it, download images to it. It does the basics very well, has a nice interface, and it doesn't have a lot of the confusing things you probably don't need. So it's limited in some ways, but kind of cleans up the interface a little bit. Just as a note, you know, Pixlr doesn't sponsor me, B&H doesn't either. They don't know I'm talking about them at all right here. I only recommend it because it gets the job done and, you know, take care of it. Oh, right. Okay, so we're going to bounce out of here and bounce into Pixlr. Okay, so here we are at pixlr.com, pixlr.com. And we're going to first upload an image. You can get it there two ways. You can click on web apps, or you can scroll right down here, and they have a few options. You want the full version, which is the editor here, as opposed to the Express, which is a nice watered down version that does some nice things, but not exactly what we want. So launch web app. And then you want to open image from computer. So here we have our example image, slightly askew. You can see this edge right here is really bad, and a lot of extra around it. I'm going to click on this to enlarge it. Okay, so the very first thing we want to do is crop the image as close as we can. So over in our toolbar menu here, you'll see this option here is crop. And I'm just going to get in close to that edge and crop it. Now you'll see it draws a nice box around it, and I have all of the image inside the box now. If you end up, like if you were to start from the right image here, the right of the artwork, and move across to the left, we would have cropped off that top left. So you want to kind of start from the highest point to try to get as much of the artwork in as possible, preferably all of it. And once we let go of the crop button, it gives us this box around it. We can see where it is. If I had, I'll cancel that. If I had cropped off a little bit of it there, you can just grab those handles and put them where they need to be. So I'm just going to tighten that up a little bit. That's pretty good. So then I'm going to hit enter or return on my keyboard, and it's going to remove all the excess from that image. So the next step is to distort the image. So part of our crop here was the idea was that we're going to create kind of a guide around this image. We can see, kind of get a sense of how straight the image is. Unfortunately, this particular program at this time does not have the ability to have like guides. Photoshop, you can draw, you can pull a blue line down the side and see where it is. But in this program, we're just going to have to kind of base it on the edge of the window of view. So to get to our distort, we're going to click from the menu bar up here, edit, and then free distort. And that's going to open up this box with these four handles around the corners. Now what these four handles are going to allow us to do is pull in any direction to either stretch out, or you could go in the artwork and get a square. Now I purposely made this piece very distorted on the one side. I would usually try to get, well, always try to get it more square in camera to start with, but it gives you a sense of how you can do it. And just to note, the more square the image is out of camera, this is an abstract painting, so it's not going to make much of a difference. But if you had buildings or straight lines in your painting, you would start seeing it might not pull together and distort back to the way you really wanted it. It might look a little weird. So it's best to get it as close as possible off camera and then pull it this way. And we talked about that, using the grid in the camera to try to get your picture out of camera as perfect as possible. So that's pretty good right there. I'm going to hit enter, and it'll keep it that way and lock it away. Now I'm going to recrop this image, so make sure my crop tool is selected. You can put in constraints here. And if you pick a aspect ratio, it'll give you these items here. So now, no crop is ever perfect. This would be a 1-to-1 crop. I cut this board myself, so it's probably not perfectly 1-to-1. But let's say if you had like an 8x10 painting, you can type in here 8 and 10 into your crop, and that'll actually restrain you from going beyond 8x10. You see the box there? I'm not going to apply this, but that's an 8x10. You might lose a little bit of your painting. In a lot of cases that doesn't matter. You know, it'll just be a little bit on the edges, but it will allow you to get a perfect 8x10. But that being said, most people, if you know, submitting to a show, aren't going to get out their pixel ruler and measure to make sure your picture is actually 8x10 in the image itself, so long as it's relatively close. So I am actually going to go back. I do not want to apply those changes. And I am going to reset this at 1x1 because really I'm going for square here. I'm going to go to my top corner and draw my crop area. As you see, I will be losing a little bit of this if I was to choose that crop, and that is most likely because of my distortion, plus the fact this board I show you is not perfectly square. I literally cut it on a table saw in the basement, so I'm going to actually say no, I don't want to apply that. Change this to no restriction because I want to get my whole painting in there. So I'm going to make the choice here to say I'm going to get my whole painting regardless of the fact that the images of it is perfectly square or not. Nobody's going to know that's not perfectly square. And then after I get that crop set, hit enter or return, and there is the image. So now let's say I want to enter this into a show, and the show's requirements require this to be 1920. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go actually to File, Save, and I'm going to save this at 100% quality. I am going to give it a name of, you know, whatever you wanted to call, but this is the file I'm going to keep in my library because it is the largest possible version of it. So this is not the one I'm going to submit to the show. And you can choose, you can have it stay as a JPEG, and we talked about JPEGs earlier, or you can save it as a TIFF at this point. It's going to, now you see it's a very large file, 20,000 KB. In a moment, I'll get back to how you can change that and see where you're at and what that really means. So I'm just going to save that file as a TIFF because I'm going to save that, put it in my folder, keep it for later. Now I want to set up my file to save for either the internet or submitting to a show. I'm going to say submitting to a show, and I'm going to go with the 1920 pixels as what the show is asking me to save it as. So once again, I am going to go back to File, Save. Sorry, back that up. I'm getting ahead of myself. I am going to go to Image, Image Size. So we can see here, this image is 2,650 pixels by 2,600 pixels. The show's asking me to put it at 1920 on the longest side. So I'm going to go to my longest side, the width, 1920. I'm going to type in there. And it's automatically going to change the height because I have constrained portions clicked. If constrained portions was not clicked, it would ask you to put in dimensions on both of them, and it would cause the image to be distorted. It would like either make it small, you know, tall and skinny, or wide and short. So I'm going to keep that constrained portions clicked. Hit OK. Now it just changed my image size. I don't know if you can see it down here on the very bottom of my screen. There it is here at the bottom right. It actually tells me how what size this image is now. It told me what it was before, but I didn't point that out. And this is the zoom. This is right now where this is 30% of what the image is possible viewing sizes on the screen. If I was to zoom that up to 100%, you can see that. If I was to blow it up all the way, that is what it is. That can be handy when you're saying, oh, I'm going to save this image for the web. You can see, well, at 1920 pixels, I'm only at 50% and got a pretty big image there. So I can go half of that amount of pixels and still get a good view on the web. Okay, so we have our 1920 pixels on the image. And I am going to go back to File, Save. And assuming the quality was already set at 100%. Now we're going to see this is 4,579 kilobytes. The show's asking for a file under 3 meg. Well, all right, well, how do I get it to there? What does this kilobytes mean as far as megs? We touched on this a little bit of a bit ago. And what I will do is bring over this window here, and as I mentioned earlier, we're just going to Google KB to MB. And this tells us, gives us a little calculator. So I'm going to type in here 3 megs. So this tells me it has to be 3,000 kilobytes. Pretty straightforward. So what I'm going to do is start changing the quality of this image. So I want to get this below 3,000, get the size below 3,000, so that the image is at 3 meg or below. First thing I'm going to do is just take our quality slider here, and I'm going to turn that down, let's say like 93%. And you'll see down here, please wait, working. And then it said, oh, it's at 1,561 kilobytes. Well, we know that's about half of what we can be at quality-wise. What it's doing quality-wise is reducing the quality of the image itself, taking information about color out of it. Now, this image has a lot of different colors in it. You'll see, as I mentioned earlier, in the different images of this image versus a image with a lot less information in it, like maybe it's just a lot of white in the image. It's a sketch, you know, and it's in charcoal. It's going to have a far less amount of color information. So you might be able to save it at 100% and be still way under the KBs that you need to be. It might be under 3,000 KBs. But because of the and if it's a red square, as I mentioned earlier, it's like nothing, no information almost. You don't have to reduce it at all. But this particular image, like I mentioned, has a lot of information in it because it has a lot of color in it, a lot of little instances. Each pixel next to each other is a slightly different color. It's a pretty extreme example. So at about 93%, we were at 1,500. So I'm going to guess I'm going to be way too far, way too low on that. I'm going to go to 95. And that's going to tell me I'm at just over 1,900. My next guess is going to be 98. And that's 2864. I'm going to try 99, but I think that's going to kick me over. Yep, so we're over 3, so I'm going to go 98%. Now, 98% versus 100% on image quality, you're not going to see the difference. It's just not going to be there. It's just not visually different on a computer screen. Okay, so I have now created my, I've now set the file size, I've set the megs. I know that this is under 3 meg, and to be exact, it would be, let's see, we have 2864 there. So it's 2.8 megs. We meet the requirements. I'm going to name this whatever you want to name it, but I'll just call this one show submit. Okay. And then save that. So there's your image now on your desktop or wherever you saved it to in the original and the 3 different sizes, the one that the TIFF that I'm going to save to my library and what I'm going to submit to the show. Now, just to round back around to what if your image was way off in color? Unless your screen's calibrated, it's hard to say whether it's way off in color. There are screen calibrators out there. From what I understand, most shows, unless it's I heard that even some of the higher end shows don't really, there are people who are choosing it are not using screen calibrators anyway, and they would have to be calibrated the same as yours. So don't stress over perfection of color too much, but if you're looking at it and going, this is way too orange, this is way too yellow, there's ways to change things. So I'm going to upload my TIFF again because that's the one I want to work with. And I am going to close this image. I'm going to open an image from my computer. I'm sorry, let me respeak that. I forgot about this program. You can't open TIFFs with this program. So we are going to do this to the JPEG So keep that in mind if you do save and you do want to reopen images in here, that you can't open TIFFs in this particular program. There are ways to take TIFFs and create them as JPEGs if you do have TIFFs. I'm not going to get into that, but if you Google around for something to the effect of image type conversion or image file extension conversion, there's programs out there. There's free ones online. I honestly don't know how good they are. Photoshop has no problem handling this, or a number of other programs. Okay, so if you want to change the colors of this, you can go up to image or adjustments up in the menu here. There are a lot of different options. I'm not going to go through them all, but you can really get into stuff. But let's say, for just example, it's not, your image is too dark, you would go to brightness and contrast. Or possibly levels, that's another one you can change it. Curves, exposure, those are all for lightness and darkness of image. But let's say it's just too blue. You can go to hue and saturation, and you can change, I'm going pretty drastic here, but you can change the color. You can go in smaller increments. Let's say this was at 0 there, and I just wanted to go a little bit more purple. I'm only going to 7. If I want to go a little bit more blue, I'm going to the negative side. You can change how saturated it is, less saturation. And this just kind of lightens and darkens the whole thing. So that's it. You can explore these different options on your own. And if you have any questions, let me know. Just one real quick note before we move on to the last 2 slides. One quick note about images. A lot of people stress over, they're looking at their computer screen, they're stressing over that yellow's not quite the right yellow, or that blue's not the quite right blue. If you're talking about printing, which is a different story, it might matter more, okay? But don't stress yourself over it too much, because here's what happens. I'm going to, real quickly with printing, if you really want high quality prints, take it somewhere that has calibrated stuff. All right, simple as that. If you're printing from your computer to your printer at home, you're going to have to do some adjusting. I mean, your screen and your printer are not ever going to look the same, okay? If you're putting it on the internet though, don't worry too much about that exact color, because if I take an image on here and format it, when I open up these images here, they probably look completely different to you than they do to me right here, and color-wise. I don't know what they look like on that side, because it's 2 different monitors that are not calibrated to be the same thing. Yeah, angles, everything else. So, you're taking an image and you're putting it on your website, and then you're looking at your computer and going, I love that color. And then someone's going to look at it on something else, and it's going to look different. And someone's going to look on something else, it's going to look different. So, and there's also with phones, a lot of people have their phones brighter or darker. You can adjust the slider a lot of times with the brightness of a phone. So don't stress yourself over it, because it's just not worth it. So you're just wasting your energy just stressing yourself over that. Tips for entries. These are just real simple, common things. We covered it. Make sure it's in focus. Make sure it's evenly lit. Make sure it's squared up and cropped correctly. Obvious stuff, right? And make sure you're framed properly too. 2,200 of them here. Both in style and technique. I mean, it does matter when you're entering Phillips mill or something like that. That's a big consideration when you're entering Phillips mill. Tips for websites. Sizes displayed. This goes back to everything we learned so far about pixel dimensions. Sizes displayed on your website may vary greatly from other websites. What I mean by that is your website, maybe, I'm just going to not use real numbers here, but say on a regular computer screen may fill this much of it, whereas somebody else's website may fill this much of it. So there's not like an exact, sorry Elizabeth, I'm cutting you off there. So there's not an exact like, oh, this is the exact number that you want for every website, but there's some tips there. Images displayed on images will display different on smartphones, tablets, large monitors, kind of this is what we just covered. You can't stress it. So here's kind of some guidelines though. So safest size, and I call this a safest size because you're not going to make a good print out of the size if someone steals it off the internet. All right. I personally don't worry about people stealing my photography off the web, off the internet too much. They're going to do it or they're going to not do it. It's not going to cost me any sales. That's the reality. If they're going to buy it from me, they're not going to steal it. But the reality is 1200 pixels by 700 pixels wide maximums. So if it's 1200 wide by 4000 tall, exaggerated, or 2200 wide by 750, well, that wouldn't work. 400 wide by 750 tall. What that's saying is it'll basically fill the a good part of the screen at that point. So those are good kind of safe numbers. If you have a website or you want it to be able to display at the full size of most monitors, then go 1900 maximum by 1200 maximum, because most monitors, I have a 24-inch monitor upstairs, 1900 pixels fills it. All right, it's a big monitor. 1200 pixels fills it height-wise. Anything bigger than that is just not. There's no value in it. There's no. You won't be using it. So there's some exceptions here, and I just kind of poked around, and the one thing I found was Fine Art America. I don't know what they require. I don't know what they ask for, but I can tell you they may ask for a bigger image than what I just told you here. They may ask for the biggest possible, because they have this feature on it where you can zoom in and see all the little texture and everything and all the painted lines and everything. So there might be cases you come across where you can upload something that's 4000 pixels wide because you can zoom in on it. Now, in some cases, you might be concerned with well, that's a big image. Someone can steal that. They can print it. But a lot of the websites that do that, they also have a lot of safeguards on it to stop people from doing it. You can't download it. Yeah, and it won't let you right-click. And careful there. Some websites, they claim that, and I can get into the code and still take it. But but a lot of them are really good at it. Some tips for social media, and I think this is the last slide here. Yeah. So image sizes, 2200 pixels on the longest size, regardless of whether it's height or width. Now, the reason that I say this is because this is not a number I came up with. This is just
This is the max you want.
right, and you probably don't want it much less.
Probably, really.
Yeah, and I'll explain why. It seems oddly large, doesn't it? But the reason is because Facebook and some other websites, Instagram, there's a lot of websites out there that do it. They have what I like to call image crushing algorithms. They want to reduce your file size for you because they don't want you to take up all their bandwidth and take up all their storage and load up huge images. But seems that the magic number is 2200 for these websites, that you'll actually get good quality when you load it up there. If you load something up there that's 4000 pixels, it's either not going to let you, or it's going to reduce it so much you're going to get like a lot of like graininess maybe, or the color is going to be off. It's going to really manipulate your image. If you upload something that's 600 pixels on the longest side, it's going to actually just tear the image apart. That's your lowest quality you're going to have. So 2200 pixels is kind of like a magic number for the longest side. On uploading stuff to the internet, you'll get a nice quality image for everybody to see that way on social media. And then lastly, upload from your desktop when possible, or your laptop, not your phone. What I just told you about the image crushing algorithms are 10 times worse on the iPhone apps or Android apps. The Facebook app just destroys images. That's it. Thanks, guys.